You ever get that feeling that someone's watching you? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck, the one you tell yourself is just paranoia? I used to ignore it. But now, I know better. I moved out here to escape. The city had worn me down. Sirens at all hours, people packed together like rats, the constant hum of anxiety that never really left my chest. I saved every cent, bought a house deep in rural Tennessee, the kind of place where the closest neighbor was miles away, and the only noise at night was the wind slipping through the trees. It was supposed to be peace. For the first few weeks, it was. I spent my days fixing up the place, repainting the walls, clearing out the overgrown yard, replacing locks that had rusted from years of neglect. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. I told myself that's what I wanted. Then I saw the truck. At first, it was just a speck in the distance, an old battered Chevy parked at the edge of the dirt road leading to my property. It sat there for hours, unmoving. I figured someone had broken down, but when I went to check, it was gone. Then it came back, again and again. Never close enough for me to make out the driver, but always there, lurking just far enough to make my skin crawl. One night I decided to stay up and keep watch. I made a pot of coffee, parked myself at the living room window, and rested my shotgun across my lap. Midnight came and went. Nothing. Then, around 2 a.m., headlights cut through the darkness. The truck rolled up, slower than before, creeping down the road until it stopped directly in front of my driveway. My pulse slammed against my ribs. A man stepped out, tall, flannel shirt, jeans, no flashlight. He just stood there staring at my house, unmoving. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. I whispered my address, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. The dispatcher assured me an officer was on the way, but out here, that meant at least 30 minutes. Too much time. I glanced back at the driveway. The man was gone, and so was the truck, like they'd vanished into thin air. Morning brought a new horror, footprints in the dirt. Large, heavy boots leading from the driveway to my front porch, stopping at my door, then turning back. I called the sheriff. A deputy named Charlie showed up a few hours later, all easy smiles and dismissive shrugs. Probably some local kids messing around, he said, kicking at the footprints like they were nothing. I'll do some extra patrols, but I wouldn't worry too much. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house made my skin crawl. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. A soft scratching noise. Long, slow, deliberate, fingernails against wood. Was coming from the back door. I gripped my shotgun, my breath locked in my throat. The scratching stopped. Silence stretched so thick it felt suffocating. Then, the doorknob rattled. I yanked the porch light on and threw the door open, shotgun aimed into the dark. Nothing. Just the empty field stretching under the pale moonlight. The next morning, I installed deadbolts on every door and nailed the windows shut. I even bought a security camera system, though the patchy internet made it practically useless. For a few nights, nothing happened. I almost started to believe it was over. Then came the banging. The first bang nearly sent me through the ceiling. It was just past midnight when it started. Loud, furious pounding on the front door like someone was trying to break it down with their bare fists. Boom! 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 I jolted upright, my breath hitching in my throat. My shotgun was already in my hands. I had slept with it beside me for the past 3 nights. My fingers curled around the stock, slick with sweat as I forced myself to move. Boom! Boom! The walls seemed to vibrate with the force of it. I stumbled out of bed, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher's voice came through, calm, practiced. "Wevan, what's your emergency? My house, someone's outside trying to get in." My voice cracked. "Stay on the line. An officer is en route." I barely heard her. The banging had stopped, and that was worse. I held my breath, every nerve screaming as I listened. Silence. thick, suffocating. Then, a single deliberate footstep inside the house. I backed into the corner of my bedroom, shotgun aimed at the open doorway. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might pass out. Then I heard it, a voice, low, raspy, like it had been dragged over gravel. "You can't hide." I fired. The shotgun blast ripped through the air, echoing through the house. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, knocking me against the wall. I scrambled to reload, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Silence. I forced myself to my feet, gun still raised, and stepped into the hallway. The air was thick, heavy with the stench of sweat and something else. Something foul like rotting wood and damp earth. The front door was open, wide open. The lock was shattered, the wood around it splintered like something had been prying it, apart for hours. But there was no blood, no body, no sign that anyone had ever been there. The sheriff arrived at sunrise. This time, he brought backup. 2 deputies swept the house and the surrounding property, rifles in hand. But they found nothing. No footprints, one of them muttered, shaking his head. No footprints? That was impossible. It had rained overnight. The ground was soft, muddy. There should have been tracks all over the damn place. Charlie pulled me aside, his face lined with something I couldn't quite place. Pity? Frustration? "Look, I believe you think something happened," he said. I stared at him. "Think?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know. Maybe the isolation's getting to you. Maybe it was just a bad dream." A real vivid one, I wanted to scream. Instead, I locked the door behind them, and this time, I didn't just add more deadbolts. I barricaded the house, nailed the windows shut, dragged furniture against the doors. For the next week, I barely slept. My body ached from exhaustion, my mind fraying at the edges. But nothing happened. No knocks, no whispers, no nightmares walking in my hallways. I started to believe. Just, for a second, that maybe I had imagined it. Then the power went out, and everything went to hell. The power died with a sickening finality, plunging the house into absolute blackness. The kind of darkness that swallows you whole, where even your own breath feels foreign, like it belongs to something else. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking, heart hammering against my ribs. When the beam finally cut through the void, I almost wished it hadn't, because I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the corner of the room, just outside the flashlight's reach. Tall, unmoving, watching. My stomach twisted, a slow, icy realization creeping through my veins. The truck, the footprints, the voice in the dark. I had locked every door, nailed every window shut. He was already inside. I couldn't breathe. The beam wavered as I lifted the flashlight higher, and for the first time, I saw his face. It was the same man from the truck. Pale skin stretched over, sharp bones, hollow eyes that drank in the light and gave nothing back. He didn't blink, didn't move. He just smiled, slow, cruel, like he had all the time in the world. And then he lunged. I fired. The shotgun's roar split the silence, deafening. In the enclosed space, the blast tore into him, knocking him back. I scrambled toward the door, my pulse a chaotic drumbeat in my ears. But before I could reach the hallway, something crashed into me, an impossible weight that sent me sprawling to the floor. The shotgun skidded across the room, out of reach. He was on me before I could scream. I fought, kicked, clawed. His hands were like iron, fingers digging into my throat, squeezing the air from my lungs. His breath reeked of sweat and decay, his grip tightening as my vision blurred at the edges. I was going to die. No, I would not die here. With the last bit of strength I had, I drove my thumb into his eye. He howled, the sound ragged, inhuman. His grip loosened for half a second, long enough for me to lunge for the shotgun. My fingers found the stock. I rolled onto my back, aimed blindly, and pulled the trigger. The blast sent him reeling. He staggered, his body crashing against the wall, and then, just like before, he was gone. No blood, no body, only the lingering stench of sweat and dirt. By the time the sheriff arrived, I was sitting on the floor, shotgun clutched in my hands, staring at the empty space where he had been. They didn't believe me. Not really. The power outage. Just an old system failing. The shattered lock. Maybe I had done it myself in a panic. The attack? Well, isolation does strange things to people. I was lucky to be alive, they said. Lucky. I left the next day, packed what little I could carry, and drove without stopping until I saw streetlights, heard sirens, felt the city wrap its noise around me like armor. I sold the house at a loss, never went back. But it doesn't matter, because I still see him. Not always. Not every night. But sometimes in the corner of a dimly lit room, or in the reflection of a dark window. Watching. Waiting. I don't sleep much anymore, because now I know the truth. Monsters don't hide under your bed. They drive old trucks. They wear flannel shirts, and sometimes, no matter how far you run, they find you. You ever hear a noise at night that makes your blood run cold? Not just a bump in the dark or the house settling, but something deliberate, a sound that shouldn't be there. That tells you, in the deepest, most primal part of your brain, that you are not alone. I used to think I was the kind of person who didn't scare easily. I was wrong. It started the night I moved into my mother's cabin. She had died suddenly. Heart attack, the doctors said. No warnings, no goodbyes, just gone. I hadn't been back in years, but now it was mine, a small wooden house on the edge of a thick Tennessee forest, miles from the nearest neighbor. I told myself I'd stay just long enough to clear out her things, sell the place, and get back to my life. That was the plan. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. No city sounds, no traffic, just the whisper of wind through the trees and the occasional crack of a branch under something unseen. I tried to ignore how oppressive the silence felt. Then I started noticing little things. Doors I knew I had locked left slightly ajar. Drawers open when I swore I had closed them. I chalked it up to exhaustion, grief messing with my head. But the feeling lingered, that sense of being watched, and then the scratches appeared. One morning I stepped outside to find deep, jagged gouges in the wood of the back door. Not random animal claw marks, these were long, precise, carved into the surface with something sharp. I pressed my palm against them. They were fresh. Something had tried to get in. That night, I locked every door, checked the windows twice. I even kept a knife within reach as I lay in bed listening, waiting. At 2:17 a.m. I heard the first noise, a faint creak from the porch. I held my breath, my grip tightening around the knife. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moved across the wooden boards outside. Then, silence. I crept to the front door, heart hammering. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. Just the empty porch, bathed in moonlight. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to relax. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe I was imagining things. Then I heard it, a whisper, right against the door, "Let me in." The whisper froze me in place. My body refused to move, my breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Let me in. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. It was a voice. A real voice. Low and ragged, spoken with the kind of unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. Then 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I gripped the knife so tightly my knuckles ached. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, but I was trapped, alone in a cabin, in the middle of the woods, with no phone signal and miles of darkness in every direction. The doorknob rattled. I backed away, stepping lightly, trying not to make a sound. The only thing separating me from whoever or whatever was outside was a few inches of old, weather-worn wood. Another knock. Harder this time. I swallowed back the bile rising in my throat. My mother had lived here for years. Alone. Had she ever heard this? Had she ever woken up to someone whispering through her door at night? I thought of the scratches, the ones I had found that morning. Had they been there before she died? My mind raced. What if she hadn't died of a heart attack? What if... The thought sent a violent shudder through me. Silence stretched. No more knocks, no more whispers. But I knew, with every fiber of my being, I was still being watched. I forced myself forward, step by step, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the dark porch and the black abyss of the forest beyond. I let out a slow, shaking breath. Maybe a face filled the peephole, pale, hollow, empty eyes staring right at me. I screamed. Stumbled backward, the knife slipping from my fingers. My pulse roared in my ears. The doorknob twisted violently, the wood groaning under pressure. Grabbed the heaviest thing I could, a cast iron skillet from the kitchen, and held it in front of me like a shield. My vision blurred with terror. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The rattling ceased. The knocks vanished. The house fell into a deathly silence. I stood there shaking, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The air felt wrong, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. I waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. I barely slept, listening. To every creak, every shift of the wind, my body rigid with fear. At dawn, I found footprints. Heavy, booted prints, leading from the woods to my door. But here's the thing. There were no prints leading away. The footprints didn't make sense. There they were, pressed deep into the damp earth, heavy, unmistakable. They led straight to my door, but not away. Whoever had been here, whatever had whispered through my door in the dead of night, they hadn't left. I stood frozen on the porch, my breath fogging in the morning air. The wood stretched out in every direction, dark and endless, the towering trees swaying gently in the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching, waiting. I forced myself back inside, locking the door behind me with trembling hands. My mind screamed for logic, for reason, but all I could think about was my mother. She had lived here alone for years. Had she heard it too? Had she let it in? I spent the day in a daze, pacing from room to room, jumping at every creak of the old wooden floors. I checked my phone 100 times, but the signal was still dead. The landline had been disconnected years ago. I was alone. By nightfall, the fear had settled into my bones, thick and suffocating. I locked every door, checked the windows twice. I even dragged the couch in front of the door, gripping the shotgun I had found in my mother's closet like a lifeline. And then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard it. A single, deliberate knock. Knock. I stopped breathing. Knock. Knock. My grip tightened on the shotgun. And then, a click, the sound of a door unlocking. But it wasn't the front door. It was the back door. I spun around just in time to see the handle slowly turning. My vision tunneled, my heartbeat crashing against my ribs. I raised the shotgun, my finger curling around the trigger. The door swung open, and something stepped inside. I don't know how to explain it. It was a man, but not really. Too tall, too thin. His skin was stretched too tight over his bones, his mouth curled into a grin that was too wide, too wrong. His clothes were old, torn at the edges, covered in dirt, like he had been waiting. His head tilted, his empty eyes locking onto mine. I pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening in the small space, the recoil slamming into my shoulder. He should have gone down. He should have gone down. But he didn't. He staggered. But that horrible grin never wavered. Then he took another step forward. I reloaded. Fired again. Nothing. His hand reached out, fingers impossibly long, curling in the air like he was testing the space between us. "You let me in," he rasped. My body reacted before my brain could catch up. I ran. I don't even remember how I got to the car. One second I was in the house, and the next, I was tearing down the dirt road at full speed, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I didn't stop. Not until I reached the first gas station on the highway, not until I was surrounded by lights and people and the normal hum of civilization. I called the cops, told them someone had broken in, that they needed to check the house. They found nothing, no footprints, no damage, no sign that anyone had ever been there. They told me I must have been sleep-deprived. That grief did strange things to the mind. But I know the truth. I never unlocked that back door. I never even touched it. And yet, somehow, it let itself in. I never went back to the cabin. I sold it for next to nothing, left Tennessee, and tried to forget. But some nights when the world is quiet, when I wake up in the dark, with that creeping feeling slithering up my spine, I hear it again, a whisper right outside my bedroom door. "Let me in." It started with the truck. At first it was just a speck of rust-red metal parked down the dirt road that led to my new home. Too far to be a concern, too still to be anything but a passing vehicle. But then it came back. Again and again. I had moved to rural Tennessee for peace, for solitude. The city had drained me, its noise, its crowds, the feeling of being watched even when alone. Here, in the middle of nowhere, I thought I could breathe. The old farmhouse wasn't perfect, creaky floors, drafty windows, and eerie quiet that settled deep into my bones. But it was mine. And for the first few weeks I convinced myself that the silence was comforting, not suffocating. Then I noticed the truck. The first time it sat a few hundred yards down the road, motionless for hours. I figured someone had broken down, but when I finally went to check, it was gone. The second time, it was closer. The third, even closer. Never moving, never occupied, just there. I told myself it was coincidence, that rural roads had their share of strange sights, that I was letting my imagination get the best of me, until the night I saw him. It was past 2 a.m., the kind of dead hour where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I had been restless, that gnawing sense of unease curling around my ribs like a vice. So I sat by the window nursing a cup of coffee, staring out into the blackness of the road. That's when the headlights appeared, slow, creeping, deliberate. The truck stopped at the very edge of my driveway, its engine humming softly, like a predator watching its prey. My pulse thundered as I ducked behind the curtain. Then, the driver's side door creaked open. A man stepped out. Tall, broad, dressed, in a flannel shirt and worn jeans. No flashlight, no phone, just standing there, staring at my house. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. After what felt like an eternity, he turned, not toward the truck, but toward my house. He took one slow step forward, then another. My fingers fumbled for my phone. 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, too calm. "An officer is on the way." But out here, that meant 20, maybe 30 minutes. An eternity. I risked another glance. He was gone. The truck too. As if neither had ever been there at all. But in the morning, I found the proof. Boot prints. Deep, deliberate imprints in the dirt, leading from the road, straight to my front door, and back again. I did not sleep that night. Every creak of the old farmhouse, every whisper of wind against the windows made my skin crawl. I sat on the couch, shotgun across my lap, staring at the door. By dawn, exhaustion sank its claws into me. But my fear had settled into something worse. Certainty. Someone had been outside my house. Someone had walked up to my door, stood there, and then left. But why? The sheriff's deputy arrived hours later. Charlie, mid-50s, thick southern drawl, eyes full of indifference. He took one look at the boot prints, scratched his head, and shrugged. "Probably just some local messing with you," he said, squinting toward the tree line. "We get pranksters out here sometimes." I stared at him. Pranksters? Who the hell drives miles into nowhere just to stand outside a stranger's house in the middle of the night? He promised to keep an eye out and left. That was the last time I called the cops. That night, I barricaded the house. Deadbolts, furniture shoved against doors, windows nailed shut. Still, it wasn't enough, because at 3 a.m., I heard it. A sound so quiet, so impossibly soft, that at first I thought I was dreaming, scratching. It came from the back door, the kitchen. A slow, deliberate drag of nails, or something worse, against the wood. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. Then, the door handle rattled, a full-bodied, aggressive shake, like someone testing the lock. I shot up, shotgun, gripped tight, heart hammering against my ribs. My breath came in shallow gasps as I crept into the kitchen. The room was dark, only the faint moonlight seeping through the cracks in the shutters. I could feel it, something on the other side of the door, waiting, watching. I raised the shotgun and with one motion flipped on the porch light and yanked the door open. Nothing. Just the empty yard, stretching out into the blackened fields. But as my breath slowed, I saw something that made my stomach twist into a knot. The wood was ruined. Deep, jagged grooves were torn into the door, like claw marks, too wide for an animal, too violent to be anything but intentional. That was when I saw the footprints again. Only, this time they didn't lead back to the road. They circled the house. I should have left. I should have packed a bag, gotten in my truck, and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I reinforced the doors, installed security cameras, even though the spotty internet out here made them nearly useless, and kept the shotgun within arm's reach at all times. I told myself I was safe. I was wrong, because on the 5th night, something changed. It started with the banging, not soft, not hesitant, furious, violent, like someone was trying to break the door, down with their fists. I jolted awake, heart slamming against my ribs, and grabbed the shotgun. My hands were slick with sweat as I stumbled toward the living room. The pounding stopped. For a second, the silence was worse. Then, footsteps. Inside the house. Impossible. I had locked everything. I had nailed the goddamn windows shut. But the steps were real. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. Coming down the hallway. Coming toward me. My breath hitched. I raised the shotgun, finger on the trigger, voice shaking as I croaked out, "I'm armed. Get the hell out of my house." Silence. Then, from the dark hallway, a voice. Low, raspy, rotten. "You can't hide." I fired. The blast ripped through the darkness, lighting up the hallway for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to see him. Tall. Wrong. Smiling. Then, gone. The house fell deathly silent. The air smelled of gunpowder and sweat and something sour, like rotting wood. I stood there shaking until dawn bled through the windows. When I finally found the courage to move, I checked the front door. It was wide open. The lock shattered. There was no blood, no sign that anyone had been there, just the lingering stench of dirt and something inhuman. The sheriff came again, this time with 2 deputies. They searched the house. They found nothing. They told me stress and isolation were getting to me, that I'd imagined it. But I know the truth. I wasn't alone. I wanted to leave, but I had nowhere to go. I had sunk everything I had into this place, so I stayed. And now, I wait. Every night, I sit in the corner of the living room, shotgun in hand, staring at the front door. because I know he's still out there. I can feel him, watching, waiting, and out here, in the middle of nowhere, no one can hear you scream. I never should have come back. The moment I stepped into my mother's old cabin, I felt it, a pressure in the air, thick and suffocating, like the house itself was holding its breath, like something was waiting. But I told myself it was just grief. She had died suddenly, a heart attack in her sleep, and I was the only one left to deal with her things. I hadn't been back in over a decade, not since I left this tiny town in the Oregon woods behind, determined never to return. But now here I was, sorting through her life, sleeping in the bed she died in, and hearing things I shouldn't be hearing. It started small. A door left open when I knew I'd shut it. Items moved from where I left them. A cold, creeping sensation that someone was watching me. I told myself, it was my mind playing tricks, that houses settle, that old wood creaks, that I was just tired. But then I found the scratches. They were on the back door, long and deep, cutting through the wood like something had tried to claw its way inside. Ran my fingers over them, stomach twisting. No animal did this. These weren't random. There was a pattern, like someone, or something, had been writing. That night, the footsteps started. They came long after midnight, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin, crunching through dead leaves, stopping, waiting, then moving again. Turned off every light, crouched by the window, heart hammering. Something was out there, and it knew I was in here. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, gripping the biggest kitchen knife I could find, my pulse a frantic drumbeat in my ears. The footsteps didn't stop. They circled the cabin, slow, deliberate. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They weren't a random hiker stumbling through the woods. They were testing me. At 3:12 a.m., they stopped. For a long moment, the silence felt heavier than the sound. I should have felt relief. Instead, my skin prickled with something worse. Dread. Crept to the kitchen, where a small window overlooked the backyard. The forest stretched beyond, a black, endless void. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned in, searching. And then I saw him, a man, standing just beyond the tree line, motionless, watching. He wore dark clothing, a hood pulled low over his face. In one hand, he held something long, thin, and gleaming. A knife. I stumbled backward, my vision tunneling. My fingers shook as I grabbed my phone. No signal, of course. Out here there was never any goddamn signal. I was alone, and he knew it. The footsteps started again, closer this time, coming toward the house. I ran to the front door, double-checking the deadbolt. The porch was empty, no movement, no sound. But then, from behind me, the back door handle twisted, slow, deliberate. The lock held, but he didn't leave. He pressed against the door. I could hear his breathing. Long, slow, deep. Like he was savoring this. Then, something sharp dragged across the wood, a horrible grating sound like fingernails scraping against bone. I pressed a hand over my mouth, forcing myself to stay silent, not to scream. Then, a single heavy knock, and a voice. Low. Rotten. I know you're in there. I snapped. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just moved. I grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, a cast iron skillet, and gripped it tight. My other hand held the knife so hard my fingers ached. My body screamed to run. My mind knew I had nowhere to go. The silence stretched, then the doorknob turned again. Harder this time. Testing. Pushing. I held my breath, heart slamming against my ribs. He can't get in. He can't get in. And then, a sharp, deafening crack. The deadbolt snapped. The door swung open so fast it slammed against the wall. And he was there, a towering silhouette framed in the doorway. His hood had slipped back just enough for me to see his mouth, stretched into a slow, wet grin, like he was savoring the moment. He stepped inside. I swung the skillet with everything I had. The impact was sickening, a dull, meaty crunch as it connected with his shoulder. He stumbled but didn't fall. I ran. Barefoot, half blind, I bolted through the house, knocking over furniture behind me, crashing through the hallway. He was right behind me. I could hear his breath, feel his footsteps shaking the floorboards. I reached my bedroom and slammed the door shut, shoving my weight against it. Too late. He was strong. The wood splintered as he pushed. His hand shot through the gap, grabbing for me, fingers like a vice around my wrist. I stabbed blindly with the knife. The blade sank into something solid and wet. His hand. He howled. The grip loosened just enough for me to rip free and dive for the window. I didn't stop to think. I just threw myself through it. Glass exploding. Around me as I hit the ground outside, my knees jarring with the impact. I ran. Branches ripped at my skin. The cold night air burned my lungs. I didn't stop. Not when I heard his scream of rage from inside the house. Not when I reached the road, my feet slick with blood from the shattered glass. Not until I saw the headlights. A truck. An old man behind the wheel. His face twisted in shock as he slammed the brakes. I collapsed against the hood, sobbing. He let me in. He drove me away. When the police arrived, the cabin was empty. The door hung open. My belongings were shattered and scattered. Blood stained the floor. But he was gone. They never found him. They told me I was lucky to be alive. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt hunted. I sold the cabin. Left that town forever. But sometimes late at night, I wake up with my skin crawling. Because in the silence, in the dark, I still hear the doorknob turning. The road wasn't on any map. I had been driving for hours, weaving through the back roads of northern Arizona, searching for something off the grid. Something real. I had always wanted to escape. The noise, the expectations, the suffocating normalcy of my life back home in Chicago. I thought a solo road trip through the desert and mountains would be the answer. Just me, my SUV, and the open road. But then I found the dirt path. A gas station attendant had mentioned it in passing, an unmarked trail off the highway that led to untouched wilderness, a place no tourists knew about. No signs, no rules, no people. That's exactly what I wanted. So I took it. The road was rough, kicking up thick clouds of dust, my tires slipping over loose gravel as I drove deeper and deeper into nothingness. No signs, no fences, no way to tell how far I had gone. And then, as the sun bled into the horizon, I realized something. My GPS had stopped working. No signal, no landmarks. Just endless desert and jagged rock formations stretching in every direction. The first flicker of unease coiled in my stomach. I should turn around, I thought. Get back to the main road before dark. But then I saw the clearing, a flat, open stretch of land surrounded by towering cliffs, perfect for camping, perfect for the adventure I wanted. So I ignored the bad feeling crawling up my spine and set up my tent. As the last light of day slipped away, I sat by my fire, letting the silence settle in. No car alarms, no city hum, just the crackle of flames, and the vast emptiness of the desert. It was perfect, until it wasn't. The first sound was soft, a rustling. Somewhere beyond the firelight, I told myself it was an animal, maybe a coyote or a rabbit. Then I heard it again, not random, not distant, closer, circling, a pattern. I clicked on my flashlight, aiming the beam toward the darkness. The light swallowed the night, revealing only empty desert. Nothing there. But I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. The fire crackled. but the sound felt wrong now. Too loud, too thin against the crushing silence beyond it. My fingers tightened around the flashlight as I swept it across the desert. Again, nothing. But I knew. I knew something was out there. A breeze rolled through the clearing, sending loose sand whispering across the rocks. But that wasn't what made my stomach knot. It was the smell. Faint at first, then stronger. Something rotten, something wrong. Like meat left out in the sun for too long. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stood up slowly, carefully. My brain screamed at me to pack up, to get in my car and go, but pride is a stupid thing, and fear makes you freeze. Then, the footsteps. Not from the front. Behind me. I turned so fast I nearly tripped over the firewood. The flashlight beam caught movement. Something tall. Something just beyond the reach of the light, standing at the edge of the cliffs. My mouth went dry. Hello? My own voice sounded small, pathetic against the emptiness. No response. I raised the flashlight higher, trying to see. The figure stood completely still. And then, it stepped back. Not fast. Not running. Just slipping deeper into the shadows. Watching. Waiting. It didn't want to be seen. That was the worst part. The fire popped, sending embers into the air, and I nearly screamed at the sound. I forced my legs to move, backing toward my car, every nerve in my body screaming to run. I reached for the door handle. Locked. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, fingers shaking. I took one last glance at the cliffs. The figure was gone. The breath hitched in my throat. I wasn't alone. And it was closer than I thought. I jumped into the car, slamming the door shut, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the keys. Get out! Leave! Now! I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. Click. Nothing. I tried again. Click. 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 Dead. A cold wave of panic crashed over me. My SUV had been perfectly fine hours ago. There was no reason it shouldn't start. Unless someone had done something to it. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, forcing my breath to slow. I had a spare battery pack in the trunk. If I could get to it. Knock. I froze. The sound was soft. Knock, knock. I turned my head, slowly, barely breathing. It came from the passenger side window. I lifted the flashlight, hesitated, then clicked it on. Nothing. The knocking stopped, but the moment I lowered the flashlight, bang. A fist slammed against the driver's side window. I screamed. My body lurched away instinctively, hitting the passenger seat. The glass shuddered, but didn't break. My breath came in ragged gasps. I raised the flashlight again, and saw it. A handprint smeared against the glass. Long fingers. Too long. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the light. And then, the whispering started. It came from outside the car. Low, guttural, inhuman. I couldn't understand the words, but they slithered through the cracks of the car like a voice from the bottom of a grave. I snapped. I reached for my knife, gripping it so tight my knuckles burned. I turned on the high beams, flooding the desert with light, and I saw them. Not one. Not two. At least 5. Figures standing at the edge of the fire's glow, their bodies thin, unnatural, faces obscured by hoods, watching, waiting. One of them took a slow step forward. The whispering grew louder, and then they moved. Fast, too fast. Straight for the car. I screamed and punched the horn, a long, shrieking blast that tore through the night. For a split second, they hesitated, and that was enough. I lunged for the glove compartment, grabbed the flare gun I kept for emergencies, and fired blindly through the windshield. The flare exploded into the night, bathing the entire clearing in an angry red glow. And the figures, they were gone. Just vanished. The whispering stopped. The air felt thin, stretched tight like a wound that had just been stitched shut. My hands trembled as I tried the ignition again. This time, the engine roared to life. I didn't think. I floored it. I sped. Down the dirt road, my headlights bouncing wildly off the uneven ground, kicking up a storm of dust behind me. I didn't slow down until I saw the highway, until the dark, suffocating wilderness was behind me and I was surrounded by signs of life again. I pulled into a gas station, shaking so badly I could barely stand. The clerk stared at me as I stumbled inside, covered in sweat, dirt, and terror. "Jesus, man," he muttered. "You look like you saw a ghost." I opened my mouth and stopped, because what the hell could I even say? That I had seen something in the desert, that there were things out there that moved faster than humanly. Possible? Things that whispered in voices made of rot and bone? That they wanted me? No one would believe me. I don't go on road trips anymore. I don't take detours. And I sure as hell never drive on roads that aren't on the map. If you've survived this far and you're one of those who love fear and terror, then don't waste any time. I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any content. The video you're watching on screen is just a taste of what's coming. Watch it. Thank you for being here, and see you next time, if you're capable of handling what's to come.